seen this. This is it. This is the end. Yes. You were laying right there, just like that. I stand here, right here, and I'm supposed to say something. I say, everything that has a beginning has an end,
All right. I'm just going to jump right into this one because
very excited.
You should see Will quivering on the other end here. Welcome back, everyone, to Podcast Part 3, the Part 3 podcast. I am Sam.
And I'm Will.
And today we are talking about Matrix Revolutions.
The third Matrix movie, and the first movie in our podcast is actually a conclusion to something. It's not just, it's supposed to be another entry. This is a definitive end up until, well, this year. I'm very excited.
This is, we're changing formats today. Welcome to Take the Red Will, jacking into the Matrix with Will Morey. I should say off the bat, we are going to get into spoilers for The Matrix Resurrections.
Right.
Because I think that has informed our opinions of The Matrix Revolutions. Yeah. And as well as The Matrix and The Matrix Reloaded. And The Matrix Revisited, and Reloaded Revisited, Revolutions Revisited, and The Animatrix.
What about Enter the Matrix?
No, my opinion on that remains the same. In that, when I was 16, I thought that was awesome. My Dell computer is whirring like a fucking jet engine to keep the processor going, but I can do bullet time now. Kicking things off, going back to 1999, I think I can safely say that, 20 some odd years later, The Matrix is has lived up to its landmark status. I'd say it's probably, in terms of influence on blockbuster filmmaking, on genre filmmaking, it's probably on a par with Star Wars at this point in terms of
absolutely
special effects, aesthetic, storytelling. It kind of was the culmination of a lot of movies in the 90s. It takes elements of The Crow, in terms of aesthetic and visual, certainly, of The Crow, Dark City, I would say Blade to a certain extent, and patches that in with the superhero genre and the sort of the chosen one archetype. And just I can't stress what a big deal this movie was in 1999 and how it kind of came out of nowhere.
Oh yeah, and how much it brought the vocabulary of particularly Asian action cinema to Hollywood. I mean, other movies had sort of toyed with it. I mean, Blade obviously had a lot of Asian cinema DNA in it and martial arts cinema in it. But this really took so much of the John Woo had obviously been making Hollywood movies at this point, but this just took so much of the vocabulary of anime and brought it to the mainstream, and it hit like an atom bomb.
Yes, I am thoroughly remiss in glazing over all of the influences of Asian cinema that are in The Matrix and were brought to the American mainstream because of this. Wire work, I'd say, wasn't a thing in 90s action in the US and in Hollywood. And then between The Matrix and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon the next year, it came and it never really went away. And I think the Wachowskis did a really good job of introducing it in a way that still made it palatable to a mainstream audience. It combined it with camera work and storytelling and in a way that just we had not seen before. I cannot stress how many movies tried to lift bullet time and make it work.
Oh, I mean, movies, music videos, TV, it was the first Shrek movie parodied it.
Not just parody, The Matrix was parodied in everything. Yeah. Literally everyone on our generation has a bad back from trying to do the Neo bullet time move.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it is literally it changed the language of action movies. And I would make the argument probably just opened the door for Hollywood to be a little more confident with genre filmmaking. And I would say that led to superhero movies. You saw Lord of the Rings come out a little later. I think it broadened everyone's horizons in a really good way. And it's, obviously it also has so many philosophical interpretations, and just the most bananas all over the place fan base you'll ever meet.
Yeah.
So Matrix comes out in 99, and then we get back they do the back-to-back sequels thing. We're going to get two movies. They're being produced and shot back to back to the future style. And they come out in 2003.
May and November.
The Matrix Reloaded came out first, and the response to it was divisive. Imagine Twitter if it was around in 2003 when this movie came out. Oh my god.
Well, and it's so funny because, like, critically, Reloaded, it was actually kind of well received. I mean, Roger Ebert gave it like a 3.5-star review, and like people critically, people liked it. And then it almost within like a couple months, and it was one of the first times I think this really happened where the backlash was almost immediate. It was not even like episode 1 hits and then maybe a year or two later everyone goes, that wasn't that good. The Phantom Menace, I should say, not just episode 1, because that could be about anything. But
also in 1999.
That's right.
99's a big year in cinema, gang.
But yeah, it almost was the first time where the internet had a big sort of backlash to a movie. Or the first time I remember it happening in real time, anyway.
Yeah, because I'd say movie like fandom and dialogue on the internet increased 100-fold between 1999 and 2003. You had way more fan sites. The internet was much more accessible. By 2003, dial-up was on its way out, and you had cable Ethernet, so everything was faster. You were watching trailers as they dropped online. But it's still like a drop in the bucket to what you see today.
Where a movie can have a backlash within 24 hours of it being released.
Or before when the trailer hits,
Yeah, and it was almost instant, the backlash, and then 6 months later, Revolutions came out, and it didn't fare as well as Reloaded had. Because Reloaded opened, it was the highest grossing R-rated movie at the time, and I don't think it was displaced until Deadpool.
Yeah. It's crazy that these are R-rated movies because they feel pretty tame by modern standards.
Yeah, I guess maybe the first one with the big lobby shootout, there's like that, I can see the MPAA giving it an R at that time. But now, I mean, like, you watch Inception, and that's a very mild PG-13 nowadays.
Yeah. Well, the lobby shootout in the first Matrix took on kind of icky connotations about 5 seconds after, because it came right hand in hand with Columbine.
That's right. About a month and a half or 2 months later after.
Like, Neo in the first movie is a trench coat clad, gun toting, shoot 'em up character, and then in the second and third movies he kind of he's more like a priest. He dresses like in this sort of like Prada priest outfit.
Yeah, I think in one of the documentaries, I think Kim Barrett, who did the costume designs, I think she describes it as a priest or a monk meets a superhero, and I think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, like he has a cape, but it's very much a fashion look, as opposed to he's kind of dressed like utilitarian when he goes into battle in the first Matrix.
Yeah.
I would say that if you haven't seen The Matrix, it's a landmark movie. It is a classic. It is so good, and the script is so tight, and the pacing is so perfect. It never gets out over its skis. And its siblings are fascinating movies in their own right, because they are also ambitious, and they are certainly not movies that are just trying to play the hits, but they also are just like Atlas holding this globe's worth of weight, and it by the end of Matrix Revolutions, their knees give out, and it just can't handle itself anymore.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a good way to put it. I'm of the camp that I think Reloaded is the best of the three. I think, I mean, the Matrix, the cultural and how important the first Matrix is cannot be disputed. I don't mean to say that Reloaded is somehow better than the Matrix, because what Reloaded does is it deconstructs the first Matrix and explores the questions that the Matrix asks, in, I think, really entertaining and interesting ways.
Yeah, it's the movie that lives up certainly to the subverting expectations buzz phrase.
Yeah.
It is very much, and again, to use another just phrase that like PR and marketing uses all the time, it's like it is definitely the Empire Strikes Back to the Matrix's New Hope. Like,
Exactly.
you don't need to see the sequels to enjoy the Matrix. It's a pretty self-contained movie, and it's flawlessly paced. Whereas Matrix Reloaded, like Empire Strikes Back, leaves you on a cliffhanger. The heroes are in a bad way at the end of it. And I would say the movie I kept coming back to in my notes for Revolutions is Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it absolutely. I mean, the way that Revolutions plays out is basically the same structure as Return of the Jedi. I mean, you have Luke, you have Han being imprisoned somewhere, and the other heroes having to go get him out. And Revolutions, you have Neo being imprisoned somewhere, and everyone else has to go get him out. You have the other characters doing something to get to end the war, and you have the main crux of the emotional battle with the hero and the villain.
Yeah,
so
both movies start with a little 20-minute mini movie where the heroes have to go to a hedonistic club and confront a decadent crime lord to get their friend back.
That's right. So yeah, I guess, how do you want to get into this, Sam? How do you want to get into Revolutions?
Well, I this is very much like, these movies are right up Will's alley. This is like, the more I think about these movies, the less I kind of have to say about them. Like, I have the least notes here of any movie we've watched so far. And I will say that I hadn't watched Reloaded or Revolutions in a long time. I had never watched them back to back, which was an interesting experience, because they are very much feel like the penultimate and ultimate episode of a TV season.
I think they work better back to back,
Yes,
honestly.
100%, because Revolution starts right where Reloaded leaves off.
Yeah, I've got a lot to say about the Matrix movies. I love all three. I think the third movie, Revolutions, has the most problems, which we're definitely going to get into, and I have a lot of thoughts and theories on it. But the three movies mean a lot to me, particularly Reloaded, because I saw that in May of 2003. It was right before I was graduating high school, and it just, like, everything about it, and particularly its twist, which obviously is an homage to 1984, implying that the rebels are actually part of the system of control that the villains have set up. I just thought that was fucking brilliant. I thought that was so cool. But also, like, all these different mythological allusions and the weird subculture of the underground programs, like, all of this, I just thought was so cool. And I spent so much of that summer defending Matrix Reloaded to my friends, to my family, to my coworkers where I was working that summer. Anyone who ever bothered to talk to me, or we ended up talking about the Matrix, I was defending that movie. And what's funny now is now with Matrix Resurrections coming out, and people are coming back to the sequels, and a lot of them are going, that wasn't so bad. And I'm like, I've been saying this for 18 years.
And I think it's a justified reaction now. I think everyone was overly harsh on Reloaded. Like, at the time, Will was, having his mind blown. I was your typical 17-year-old high school piece of shit going, "Did you see Matrix Reloaded? See them all dancing? It's totally gay." It's like, just not looking at the movie the right way, and coming back to it all these years later, I can see what they were going for. I really respect the Wachowskis for very rarely doing things because they think that's what the fans want.
No.
And I think they succeed where a lot of other filmmakers fail, even when their movies kind of, like I said, collapse under the weight of themselves. And I'd say Revolutions has that problem more so than any of the other three movies in the series.
Yes, and that's the biggest problem. So I guess probably the best way to get into Revolutions is to talk about the end of Reloaded, because I think this is where most of the problems of Revolution stem from. So the end of Reloaded, Neo discovers that basically everything that we have been told in the first movie, that there's these two, that the machines are at war with humans, and that he is the prophesized one who is going to destroy the machines, is a lie. He discovers that it's actually a means of control by the machines to keep them under thumb, and it's through this messianic story. And so it deflates his entire prophecy. And then finally, Morpheus, who through two movies has been saying, I believe in the one, this has been my thing, the war is going to end because of my belief in the one. His entire world, his entire belief is shattered and just destroyed at the end of that movie. And so we get to Revolutions, and here's the problem. Revolutions ignores Morpheus. And I think this is the core of why Revolutions doesn't quite work as a movie, is because Morpheus is sidelined. He's sitting through the whole thing. He basically sits in a spaceship as they try to get back to Zion, and he doesn't get the arc of him coming to terms with the loss of his belief. And ultimately what he should be, I think, his arc should be coming to, I'm going to fight for humanity. And that's where he should be going. And now here's my crackpot theory about Revolutions, is that there's an hour of this movie that has been cut and is missing. And when the backlash to Reload...
Just a theory, I should clarify.
Yeah, no one in production has ever said this. No one has ever implied this. So this is just my bullshit theory.
But I will say that in your defense, as we know now in filmmaking, 5 months is still a long time between two movies coming out, and it's enough time these days to swap a Kevin Spacey for a Christopher Plummer in the entirety of your film,
right?
So you can make a lot of changes to a movie in 5 months.
And I don't think like anything was radically reshot. I don't think anything like that.
I don't mean that.
I just think things were cut, and I think a lot of I think what happened is the backlash to Reloaded was so strong and so fast that somebody, I don't know if it was Wachowski's or the studio or somebody, said, we need to hack this thing down to make it an action movie. And that's basically what they did. They cut it down to the bone, and I think it removed Morpheus's arc. And either that's not true, which it probably isn't, frankly, but then because of the fact that the two movies were shot back to back, and they were also shooting footage for Enter the Matrix video game, I think that there was just too much going on, and they couldn't figure out how to tell the story. And that's the core of the movie, of the emotional arc. Well, not the core, but Morpheus needs to be a part of this movie because he's such a big part of the first two, and he needs to come to terms with his loss of belief, and he needs to get to the point where he's like, I believe in Neo, and I need to fight for the humans too. He needs to be the one strapping himself into a mech suit at the end and fighting the machines. Like, that needs to be where he goes. He needs to be, I'm fighting for Zion, I'm not fighting for this prophecy, I'm fighting for myself, which is basically where Neo gets to as well.
Yeah, it's to keep with the Return of the Jedi parallels, I'd say he goes from being basically Han Solo meets Obi-Wan Kenobi in the first Matrix to being his equivalent character in Return of the Jedi would be Lando's co-pilot.
Yeah, who just sort of like looks surprised and upset and things. And the whole trilogy is sort of making this point about the hero's journey, about Joseph Campbell and that kind of thing, and that basically it's not about the one, it's about the many, and that it's about all of us together working together towards peace. That's ultimately what the trilogy gets to. And the biggest problem with Revolutions is that it focuses so much. There's the 30-45 minute stretch in the middle of the Siege of Zion, dealing with characters who have had maybe 2 lines, 3 lines across 2 movies. Yeah. And you lose you don't care, and it sidelines the main characters, and you're just kind of sitting there going, well, it looks cool and I know at least conceptually what's going on, but you just compare it to, the battles in the Lord of the Rings movies, which were coming out right around the same time, where you always are focused on somebody you know and care about. You're always focused on either a Hobbit, or Aragorn or Gimli, or any of these people. Whereas Revolutions, it becomes this kind of muddy mess, that battle, which you need to be really invested in to make it work.
It's basically if you did all of the Death Star and Endor sequences in Return of the Jedi first, and then spent an hour with just Luke, with the Emperor and Darth Vader.
Right.
So it's there's no intercutting. It's basically feels like two different episodes of a TV show.
Yeah.
And then the movie ends so abruptly.
Yeah.
I'd sort of forgotten how it's done. You don't really have resolution with any of the characters.
No, I mean, I think it kind of works because ultimately what you get is, it's basically, the idea is that the whole war was between God and the devil, fighting over human souls, in a way. So it works kind of with the architect and the Oracle's conversation, but it has this thing that also Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3 had, where it's like, we're just tired. We just want it to end. We've been doing this for so long.
And it's so interesting to me, the more I think about The Matrix, like as a franchise, it's such a small world. You have the machine world, like the machines have a city and the humans have Zion, they have a city, and then you have the stuff inside the Matrix, which is like a third city. But it just feels so limited in scope once you get past the sort of emotional and philosophical underpinnings. So if you lose the thread of those, I think the world feels a lot less compelling.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's one of those things where this is kind of how I feel about a lot of Star Wars stuff, that it's like, once you sort of get past the fall and redemption of Anakin Skywalker, there's not really, like, Star Wars as it is like an interesting world to think about. It's not an interesting world to spend all that much time in. That's kind of how I feel most of the time. Not that I don't have fun with external Star Wars projects or anything. It's just that it's just like, I feel like the world isn't all that it's cracked up to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Star Wars has the benefit of a long narrative timeline and a big map. It's a big sandbox. You can tell stories, but I don't think The Matrix, if you're not telling the story of Neo and the machine war, it's just kind of, you get little bite-sized Animatrix style pieces.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it lends itself more to sort of short form storytelling than it does to anything long form, which is.
Yeah, it's a world of, and I don't mean this in a bad way necessarily, a world of style over substance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it just seems like the three movies were constructed to be one sort of singular story, whether or not they knew where they were going after the first Matrix when it was first made or first written. It seems like it's one contains. I mean, it makes sense. That's why the Wachowskis didn't really want to do a Matrix sequel for a very long time. And it seems like every year since 2003, Warner Brothers kept saying, hey, you want to do a Matrix sequel? And they kept saying no.
Yeah, they've gone on to do their own things. And, they only kind of were, well, one of them came back to it. But you get the sense in Resurrection, and they're not subtle about this, that they were being brought back a little bit under duress to make it.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess, I really liked Resurrections a lot. I mean, I think it's got some problems, but I really like it. But it did become clear that it was like, if I don't do this, Lana Wachowski said, if I don't do this, somebody else will. And I don't want anyone else to fuck up my baby.
And I respect that 100%.
Oh, yeah.
And I kind of feel about these, I think most of my issues with Matrix Resurrections are, yeah, they're technical, they're aesthetic,
Yeah.
problems with the action, problems with the pacing, things. Yeah. I like what they were doing. I like that they're pulling an even less subtle Last Jedi on the situation. I think the movie has a lot of the same issues as The Last Jedi, but I like that with The Matrix, because The Matrix has always been meta, and The Matrix has the bandwidth to do that. And I like ruffling fan base's feathers. I'm okay with that. I'm especially okay with the creators of the franchise doing that.
Yeah.
And I think that stuff really works in Resurrections. The problems with the technical aspects of the movie are, a whole discussion in their own right, because
it's just so funny that it seems like part of the genesis of making the Matrix and the Matrix movies in and of themselves was to make smart action movies. And what's very clear in Resurrections is that Lana had no interest in dealing with the action. I mean, I think the action is fine. It's not good, but it's fine.
It's fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with it, but by the Matrix standards,
right? Exactly.
Yeesh.
I mean, in the first Matrix, you have all the wonderful action scenes in that, which, again, as we had said at the outset, just set an atom bomb in the industry. And then in Reloaded, you have these incredibly detailed, amazing action scenes that are just pushing the boundary of what they could possibly technically do. And I mean, that freeway fight just rips. It is so good.
Yes, everyone talks about the what's known as the Burly Brawl, which is Neo versus a hilarious number of Hugo Weavings as Agent Smith. And it's the cutting edge, the bleeding edge of special effects in 2003, not covered up by rain or smoke, they're not orcs, and it shows.
Yeah, and they try to do this thing with it's one continuous shot where it goes from the sky, goes down into into this bubbling cauldron of people and swings around and then goes back up. And they just couldn't pull it off. I mean, and my understanding is they were working on that sequence right up to the day it was released, or very close.
Oh yeah, it was in all the marketing. It was such a big deal. But I would say that the other two action set pieces in Reloaded, the freeway chase and the battle at the Merovingian's chateau, the sort of medieval weapons fight that happens, are both superior action scenes. The freeway chase is so good, and it's one of those ones you can tell it was crisply storyboarded. It like the way Spielberg did the action sequences in Indiana Jones, where they knew exactly where everyone was geographically. And
you could watch it from beginning to end without having seen any of the rest of the movie and just know exactly what's going on, what everyone's doing, and why everyone's doing it, just on a visual level alone.
Yeah, it's one of those great moments in genre and action filmmaking where they tell you exactly who is who and who to root for with just the visuals. The best example of that in filmmaking is the beginning of Star Wars,
right?
Where not in all filmmaking, but certainly in this kind of filmmaking, where the little guys are good and the big guys are bad, and it's rebels versus the evil empire, and all you get that is just from one shot of two spaceships.
Exactly.
And this is the long form freeway chase version of that.
Yeah, exactly.
And I would say the problem in Revolutions is that, the Burly Brawl is a special effects kind of a hullabaloo, if you will, but it's still a fairly restrained action sequence in one location. The problem with Revolutions is that the middle act is one big CGI battle sequence, not in the Matrix, not using the sort of wire work stylized action. And then there's a second big fight sequence that's two characters dressed in black fighting it at night in the rain. And the special effects in Revolutions might be better. They might feel more modern compared to Reloaded, but the action is way muddier and messier, and it takes up a lot of the movie.
Yeah, and it's just not as inventive. The squid design, the drone robots in the real world is very cool. You get the problem when you have a million of them in one shot. They all just become sort of squiggly dots. And same with the mech suits everyone's in. They look cool when they're moving around and stuff, but when a bunch of squiggly dots are attacking them and shooting at them, it just all becomes kind of visual noise.
This time watching the mech suits, they all moved like they're like a fat drunk Star Wars alien, because just the way they're constructed, they've got like, if they were like a robot, it's like a robot with no head and a huge pot belly, and is just sort of like stumbling on squat legs, and it like holding like shopping bags almost. That was the visual I had. This is the movie that finally paid off on everyone that like ever wanted to see. What if they put guns on the power loader from Aliens?
And killed a lot of aliens in one.
Famously, the original pitch for Alien 3 was 100 alien queens versus 100 power loaders.
And that's what this would look like.
Yeah, pretty much.
Again, when you have something that has a very like unique singular design, when you replicate it and have them swarming something, it just becomes noise. And I appreciate that sequence on a technical level, because it, like the Lord of the Rings movies, they just threw the book at it, like there's like miniatures and bigatures and like CGI and animatronics and all these things that are going on in it, but it just, so much of it. And I mean, I think it really just comes down to, because there are no real characters that we've spent a whole lot of time with in that sequence, it's just hard to like care.
Yeah. There are like, by that point in Revolutions, there are probably 5 or so characters you can really latch onto in the Matrix. You got Neo, you got Morpheus, you got Trinity. I'd say you've got Niobe, and you got Agent Smith, who's he's a villain, but he's still magnetic. None of them are in Zion when the machines attack. You are dealing with only ancillary characters. Right. No one that would be on the level of even Lando in Star Wars.
Yeah, and then they've only had like 2 or 3 lines across 2 movies, and you're kind of like, I don't know, okay.
The biggest character in that battle sequence is Locke, the sort of commander, who is the most obstinate prick to ever enter one of these movies. He is just such an asshole.
It really is, and it's so funny how much of an asshole he is. Even when Morpheus and Niobe and that crew come in and kind of save the day, he's like, fuck you guys, you fucked it up.
You just handed the docs to them. And at the same time, it's like, he doesn't believe in the One. He doesn't like Morpheus. He's banging Morpheus's ex-girlfriend. Right. It's like he doesn't like anybody. He almost want him, like, he's like, you're out of your mind, Neo. Morpheus, I ought to have you thrown in the brig court-martial. He almost wants to look at Trinity and be like, I don't know who you are, but I hate you too. it's just...
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, again, I do deeply, I like Revolutions a lot, but it has just, its problems are just, are ones of like pacing. And I think it might actually be the shortest of the 3.
Yeah, it's only about 2 hours and change. It's shocking how short these movies are, because I think of them as being your standard 2-hour and 40-minute movies, but they're not even the new one.
No, they come in maybe 2 hours and 10. I mean, and Revolutions is like 2 hours and 9 minutes with credits. And
and it's like a 10-minute credits as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's for 2 movies that were made back to back. It feels like it was made like years later than Reloaded, because it also just, everything you talked about that you loved about Reloaded, all those plot twists, all that character stuff, Morpheus's arc that was teed up at the end of Reloaded, none of it really matters. Reloaded and Revolutions, I would equate to all the stuff that's set up at the beginning of the last season of Game of Thrones and how much of it's actually paid off. for the sake of getting it all done in one movie and having as much action as possible.
Yeah, it rushes through the stuff that it shouldn't. It's one of these things, and it actually prefigures a lot of like what modern blockbusters are like nowadays, where it's like it needs to stroll when it sprints, and it needs to it needs to sprint when it strolls. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and because you've sidelined Morpheus, and to a lesser extent, you've sidelined Trinity. They both are essentially just
Right.
co-pilots for the entirety of this movie. You only really have Neo,
And he's barely in it.
He's really not in the movie very much. And other than that, you just have everyone in Zion, and everyone
Right.
in Zion is just like a faceless backup dancer.
Right.
Like literally, they all look like backup dancers. They all are just sweaty, glistening people in tank tops. They all just walked in from the set of Christina Aguilera's Dirty video.
I will say there is one of the best moments across these three movies is when Neo and Trinity they're heading to the Machine City and they have to go up above the clouds, and Carrie-Anne Moss's acting and the way that the visuals are designed, and when the ship goes up above the clouds and Carrie-Anne Moss sees the sun for the first time, like the real sun for the first time. It's like an honest to God transcendent moment in like cinema, and I think it just fucking rules.
I gotta say, and I feel this even more so after Matrix Resurrections, Carrie-Anne Moss is the like unsung MVP of these movies.
100%.
Like she often gets a very thankless job. Like Trinity, written by most people and performed by most people, would essentially be like I don't know what the term would be, but it's just like, oh, you getting she's the girl you gotta get to become the one,
right?
Like she's like a prize. She also doesn't fall into the tropes of like the tough girl. She's not Gamora. She's such a great character, and she really doesn't get an arc of her own after the first movie, but like just she's very compelling, and I think that's in Carrie-Anne Moss's performance, and she's great in the new one.
Oh yeah, and I think what the thing that the three movies sort of tease is that Neo really isn't the one. It's Neo and Trinity together that are the one, and this new movie really just spells that out. And I think that's really smart and
the
clever.
Dyad. Oh, I'm sorry. What movie are we talking about?
We're gonna get there.
Am all the Sith.
The dead speak. The dead speak
on Fortnite.
Oh boy!
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Oh boy!
Shut up. That's how.
He just did. Oh boy, that's gonna be a fun one.
Oh, we're gonna get three. Boy. We're gonna get the three Palpatine movies.
That's right.
Where he's going full Pleasance.
That's right. We're gonna
we get good, and then we get once more the Sith will rule the galaxy, and then we get look what you've made.
Oh, God, so much fun!
Gotta save it.
We gotta save that.
That's candy. That's we need to wait and have fans for that one.
Yeah, that's right. That's we have a following that's not 5 people.
I kind of want to talk about the stuff with the Oracle in this one. Obviously, in the first 2 movies, the Oracle is played by Gloria Foster, and she's great in both of them. Really fun performance, and obviously, it's not what you expect in The Matrix when they build up this character called the Oracle. And then, sadly, Gloria Foster passed away, I think, shortly after doing her scenes for The Matrix Reloaded. And so they have in the story that she's basically changed how she looks. She's kind of like on the run from the Merovingian for betraying him. And she's played now by another actor, Mary Alice, who I like in the movie. She's fine. She feels a little more understated compared to Gloria Foster. But it's just so weird to me that like everyone talks about to her, like she's still hanging out in the same kitchen and she's still wearing the same outfit. And, she's still like an older lady making cookies. if the idea is the Oracle had to like sort of reset and change who they were to stay off the grid and stay away from the Merovingian, I feel like they should have really gone. They should have full on Jonathan Grofter.
Yeah, it's very strange that they didn't. And my only thought is that they just didn't have the time. And then maybe they just couldn't. And maybe there was so much of the dialogue that was already written for, for the Oracle, and maybe they had shot some of those scenes, but they had to connect it to the video game too. And like, I don't know, maybe they just didn't have it happens. Maybe it happened suddenly enough that they just couldn't reconfigure it in time.
But it's the new actress in the video game too.
No, I know, but I'm just saying maybe I have no idea. Maybe they just couldn't, maybe with their shooting schedule as such, maybe they couldn't be like, we need to rewrite all of this stuff to, to explain a completely new thing. I don't know.
It's weird just because they also keep playing it like all the other characters are like, what happened to you?
Yeah.
And we're like, besides Gloria Foster passed away, I don't know what happened to her.
That much difference. Yeah, I mean, I think it highlights sort of the problem, which is something we haven't really gotten into, the whole transmedia thing that was also a big part of these movies. The whole, they're going to be connected to a video game and the Animatrix and like all this stuff that, hadn't really been done before and started with this, but I think that it's the problem with so much of that Oracle story was told in Enter the Matrix that the movies suffer a little bit by not having that connective tissue.
I blame this franchise for having to see the movie Dreamcatcher. Because I went because also they had the Final Flight of the Osiris Animatrix short before it.
Yeah, I don't know why I didn't catch Dreamcatcher in theaters, because I wanted to see the animated short. I just must have not had time or something.
The sad thing is I could pretend that it was just to see the Matrix short, but it looked cool from the trailers, and I was way into Kevin Smith movies at the time, and Jason Lee was in it. And I was just, God, I was so... What was I doing, Will? What was I doing?
What were you, 15 or 16 when that came out?
Oh, God, was that 2002? So, yeah, I was 16. I could have... I probably drove there in my car myself to the Regal Cinema at the Solomon Pond Mall in Marlboro.
Look, we all do things we regret when it comes to movies when we're younger, especially at the time when we were growing up. I mean, I snuck in to see Swordfish, of all things.
Well, speaking of bullet time knockoffs.
Yeah, exactly.
Swordfish. Too bad there's not a third one of those.
There's no part 2 either.
Swordfish. I'd forgotten all about that movie.
Oh boy.
That was a big deal when that came out, because that was the one, where you could see Halle Berry's boobs.
Right.
That was like the selling point of the movie. It was practically on the poster.
And she got paid a lot of money for that. That's my understanding. As she should.
If I had to take my shirt off and be in the movie Swordfish, I would like a large paycheck as well.
I just remember sitting in the theater and having the scene where Hugh Jackman has to do some complicated hacking while getting a blowjob and being like, what is this?
It's even better in the TV edit because they cut out the fact that she's going down on him. So it just seems like he's got to do it with a gun to his head, but he's still reacting like he's trying not to get turned on by the whole thing.
Oh, God. Oh, what a sleazy movie.
That movie is so sleazy. That's one of those... I feel like those are like the precursor to the Transformers movies where everyone is like orange and sweaty.
Yeah. Very slimy. Everyone's slimy.
Everyone's just moist, and everyone it's a Jerry Bruckheimer era movie, so all the heroes just hit golf balls off like trailers or oil derricks and stuff.
Why was that a trope? Why
because they were rebels, and they did tough guy stuff, but they didn't care
and had nothing better to do.
I don't know, Will. That's for when we do
the Swordfish podcast, the Swordfish Minute. When we go through it every minute.
Yeah. I want to do Independence Day, but every 4 minutes, and call it the ID forecast.
Oh man, that's great. That's a great
Yeah,
idea.
yeah. All right, stay tuned, folks.
Now, will we have to cover Independence Day Resurgent on that too, or no?
No, because that's ID 5 anyway. Anyway, back to the Matrix Revolutions. I think it is very much reminiscent of those third movies in a trilogy that don't, like, you set up all this cool stuff and then you don't pay it off, or you immediately start backpedaling it. That's something we've encountered before. We've got multiple Halloween movies that backpedal on the things they set up, where it's just not interested in it's got other priorities besides paying off the things it's teed up, and it comes at the expense of the characters too.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of that's the big problem. And I mean, I think it's more concerned with just tying up the story of Neo and getting to the place of this isn't a story about the one, this is the story about humanity and humanity fighting for peace. And it's very focused on that, which is kind of a thread in Reloaded, but not really. And it's weird in a way, because like you said, you know, it feels like this movie actually came out a year or two later, or well after the fact, and doesn't feel like it came out 6 months later and was sort of part of the same process of making the movie.
And I don't know what it is. I feel like that's the case with a bunch of the back-to-back made movies, because you could say the same thing about Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and 3. You could kind of say the same thing about Back to the Future 2 and 3.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is, I think especially with the 6 months release window, I think you lose focus. I think what happens is one movie wins over the other, and I don't know, you know, I don't know which one. It seems to me Reloaded won that battle over Revolutions, and that they were so focused on finishing Reloaded and getting the Burly Brawl working and making sure it tied into the video game correctly, and that the video game was being released, that Revolutions, I think, it feels rushed, and I think that's the one that lost sort of the focus. And I think these things need more time, to either more time in development or more time to in the edit, where you can figure out if they need to reshoot things or reconfigure whole sequences or things like that.
Yeah.
And, you know, despite my crackpot theory that this was hacked down to the bone from something much longer, which, again, is only coming from my brain.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, but maybe at the script stage.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Because that is much more common. It's the film equivalent of that John Mulaney bit where he talks about writing a happy birthday poster in block letters, but you write it too big and then you run out of room, and so you start squishing the letters together. That's basically what happens with these movies.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's kind of also a problem that the Wachowskis have. I mean, it's not a bad problem, I don't think, but it's just they shoot for the moon on all their movies, and, you know, some of them just have, it's like the movie has too much ideas to contain.
Yeah, I mean, you can never fault them. There is no Wachowski movie out there that feels like a cash grab or a work for hire.
No.
I feel like the only one that is like that is, like, they farmed it out anyway, like V for Vendetta.
Right. Where, like, they just produced it, or Ninja Assassin, where it's just sort of like they let their collaborators direct something, but they just never, they always, you know, swing for the fences. And what's funny about the Matrix movies is, after the Matrix movies, their movies are all bombs, every single one.
Yeah, it's they have a career path very similar to John Carpenter in that sense.
Yeah.
And I mean, their movies are bombs. Some of them have gotten reevaluations. I know Speed Racer has a huge fan base now. It's got a big cult following.
I'm one of them.
I'm going to say this. Every time one of these mediocre Hollywood adaptations of an anime fails, it's good because it means we've kicked the terrible live action Akira down the road another couple years. So it's good that Speed Racer failed, just like it's good that Ghost in the Shell failed and that Cowboy Bebop got canceled, because eventually we're going to have to reckon with live action Akira, and it won't be pretty.
Oh no, it will not be. It will not be. I mean, I will say that there are, there are only really two movies that sort of have gotten the aesthetic of anime as far as adaptation goes. I actually think the Matrix movies get the aesthetics of anime and manga pretty well. But it's Alita and Speed Racer for me are the only ones that sort of have really made it work.
And then after that, they had Cloud Atlas and they had Jupiter Ascending.
Right.
Am I forgetting one in there?
Sense8.
Oh yes, the TV series, and that
TV series.
And I feel like this happens a lot with directors. They go and do like a TV show, and it's kind of like a palate cleanser for them. Like Sam Raimi doing the Evil Dead series, he said that was really refreshing. And Martin Scorsese, when he did Boardwalk Empire, same thing. He was like, oh my god, this just was like a moment of clarity for me, just to be able to do something that's simple and restrained. And Sense8 is it's certainly ambitious, but compared to something like Jupiter Ascending, it's downright conservative.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and it was sort of during Sense8 where the two, where Lana and Lily sort of had either a falling out, or one of them, or Lily just sort of felt like she was done with sort of big budget filmmaking, and unclear exactly how their creative partnership sort of split, but they did.
Everything that has a beginning has an end.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm glad one of them came back to the Matrix, because it was going to happen no matter what.
Yeah.
And if you can't force, it's Simon and Garfunkel. You can't force two people to keep working together, because it's just going to be a detriment to the work they're doing.
Well, and it sounds like they keep making these movies that don't connect, at least initially, with people, and the studios keep probably trying to make them do what the studios want to do, and I'm sure it just gets sort of demoralizing at a certain point when you're just kind of like, I don't want to deal with this anymore.
Yeah. And obviously Sense8 was a positive experience on a certain level. A lot of Sense8 actors are in Resurrections. Yeah. I think a good chunk of Bugsy's crew, that aren't robots, named Cybebe
and Octocles.
All I could hear was Moira Rose from Schitt's Creek going, Cybebe.
Yeah.
That's my frustration, I think, with the Matrix Resurrections, is also it didn't go as far as I would have liked in terms of like the mixing of the machine and the human world. It's a world that has very little like sort of the transhumanist cyberpunk sort of elements to it. You're either a program, or you're a human, or you're a robot.
Well, I mean, I guess there's the ball bearing programs that can interact with the real world. I mean, it's kind of interesting that the Matrix sequels after the first one kind of dropped a lot of that like cyberpunk aesthetic, and sort of became more mythic and less sort of that grungy feeling. Like there's a couple scenes where they have to hack things in Reloaded, but they don't. It's less that sort of dorky cyberpunk thing, and I don't exactly know why that is. Maybe it just like the end of the 90s felt that was the very cyberpunk sort of epic, and then 9/11 happened, and maybe that sort of shifted a lot of their thinking about this. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd say the sets in Reloaded and Resurrections, every single one of them is the set of a music video.
Yeah,
the train station, the BDSM club, the underground tunnels. The rainy street.
Yep. It just, but I don't know. It seems like a lot of the cyberpunk aesthetic sort of fell to the wayside as they moved into the sequels. And by the time you get to Resurrections, I think that the cyberpunk thing feels so quaint that any sort of you do it in any sort of way, it's going to feel like a throwback.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Resurrections it's much more playful in how it's being subversive.
Yeah,
Like it's and I know that not everyone was into that. Both like Matrix fans and some critics thought it was like way too on the nose. But
yeah,
it didn't really bother me because The Matrix, for all its, obfuscating philosophical dialogue, is not a subtle franchise. It's
no.
like he's Jesus. He goes into the Jesus pose for an extended shot at the end of Revolutions.
Yes, yeah. I mean, he becomes a martyr and fights for peace. I mean, he's
Yeah.
Kung Fu Jesus.
And Resurrections is definitely uses a lot more. That's definitely not, the cyberpunk aesthetic and the hacking aesthetic has been replaced with video gaming.
Yeah,
Everyone's got a new skin.
yeah,
That's sort of where and it's obviously the setup inside the Matrix for Thomas Anderson is that he is a video game designer that designed a game called The
The
Matrix.
Matrix, which follows the original Matrix trilogy
Yeah.
fairly closely, anyway.
Yeah, and his business partner is Agent Smith.
Yeah,
Which I liked. I liked that as a setup.
I did too.
Yeah.
There was a lot. Yeah, and I think also the Wachowskis just evolved so much as filmmakers. They after the Matrix movies, they became far more like the Matrix movies are very earnest anyway, but the Wachowskis became even more earnest, and their films became even less subtle than the Matrix movies.
They're not cynical filmmakers at
No,
all.
not at all.
Which is weird because the whole "we live in a simulation" thing is one of the most cynical conspiracy theories there is.
Right, but that's what's so interesting about the sequels is, particularly actually Revolutions, not so much Reloaded, but in Revolutions they basically say, if you want to live in the simulation, that's fine. It's just if people want to leave, let them leave, and it's that's sort of what makes Revolutions so fascinating. As the button to the trilogy that has been so focused on this binary of machines versus humans, and then it eventually comes down to no.
Yeah, I really like that because you go back to Joe Pantoliano in the first one, he would rather be in the Matrix. He'd rather,
Right.
Ignorance is bliss. And I think that in the context of that world, that's a valid point of view. And I like where they land at the end of Revolutions.
Yeah.
I think it is a really good ending, and it's not the ending you would expect, but it is, it's always been the one will bring the end to the war was the prophecy.
Exactly.
And he did, he brought about peace.
Yeah.
It wasn't until maybe the last time I watched it that I kind of finally put all those saw the thread winding its way through, because it is basically, I think, if they set up, just off the top, let's say they set up 10 different things at the end of Reloaded that needed to be resolved, they only resolve maybe 5 of them, and none of them are like the character arcs that would normally in a movie be where you figure out, where the characters figure out what the resolution is going to be.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's, that's my big problem with it, is just that. And again, I should say I love all 3 movies dearly in a lot of ways, but Revolutions has the most problems for me. And it's just, it's the Morpheus of it all is a big problem. And that's kind of, without him, you kind of lose a lot of your heart. And then Neo and Trinity are sidelined for so much of it too. And you're just sort of stuck with robot battles for a good chunk of it.
Yeah, I agree. It's unfortunate because I think if Revolutions had been a stronger movie, I think in hindsight we'd all be more forgiving of the mistakes of Reloaded. But I think it's the fact is Revolutions doubles down on the problems in Reloaded. They're both very messy movies, but I think you can't. It's not for a lack of trying.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and like the Lord of the Rings movies, I mean, they just threw sort of every filmmaking trick in the book at these things. Just everything that you can think of is in these.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's, as we were talking about with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3, like this was an era where Hollywood sort of gave the keys to, or gave a lot of money to filmmakers to just make whatever wild shit they wanted to. And it's kind of a weird era of blockbuster filmmaking. And I think it kind of ends really at Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3. I mean, you have like Nolan and some other filmmakers who kind of still do, but it doesn't feel as like wild and strange as it did in the mid-aughts.
And part of that would be, I'd say the last movie like that is Nolan's Dark Knight. And Nolan, he's not a filmmaker I would call wild and strange. His movies are very polished and very, for better or worse, they're very meticulous. They're not messy in like a fun way, in my opinion. And we'll get to The Dark Knight Rises.
Yes, but I'm also thinking of like the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, which is so like kind of banana pants too, which we'll get to talking about at some point as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, and even ones that were franchise non-starters, like sort of like Chronicles of Riddick is like so like insane that a major studio funded Vin Diesel's like Dungeons and Dragons obsession. Like, it's like they were basically like, Vin Diesel, what do you want to do? I want to make Dune, but with Riddick.
Oh man, yeah, there are so many auteur, like super stylized non-starter movies in the 2000s. Like the Aeon Flux movie is in there. Yeah. Pretty much any movie by Tarsem after The Cell would like be under that umbrella.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating decade for genre movies because they're kind of crawling out of the hole that they dug for themselves in the 90s. Because try to list like the 10 best sci-fi movies from the 90s, and it's a tough list after The Matrix,
Well, right. I mean, you get what, like Terminator 2?
Yeah, 91 and 99. There you go.
Star Trek 6 is what, 91? Something like that?
It's more smaller stuff. It's things like Pitch Black. It's not...
Well, Pitch Black was also... Well, I guess it's 2000, sort of the...
Yeah.
Yeah, but...
But it's like... in the 90s, sci-fi, and I would also say also horror until Scream, were not profitable like genres. You were seeing a lot more just action and a lot more, just drama. Yeah. Like a lot more period pieces.
Yeah.
You think of like the things that you think of your Braveheart and your Gladiator,
Last of the Mohicans.
Yeah, exactly. More sweeping double VHS epics like that.
Yeah, I mean, it really, I guess part of it is just that it took a long time for special effects to sort of catch up too. I mean, that's kind of the big thing. But yeah, I mean, you have The Matrix, you have Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies, and Lord of the Rings, which I feel like are the three franchises that sort of kicked off a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I would say maybe to a lesser extent Harry Potter as well.
Oh yeah, well, Harry Potter.
But Harry Potter was already a phenomenon. The movie was kind of like inevitable no matter what.
Right, and I mean, the fact that the movies were decent at the beginning and got better as they went, was a happy accident. And I get, Lord of the Rings, obviously, a movie was inevitable. There had been attempts before, but those movies were just so good, I think, that studios were like, well, the nerds, they seem to know this shit. And then,
Yeah, it'll be interesting when we get to not so much Return of the King, but the third Hobbit. We'll talk about, if Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions are two movies that might have been better served being three. The Hobbit is two movies that got bloated out into three, and it shows.
I've only seen the first Hobbit, and I never saw the other two. So
I saw all three in theaters, and then I've watched the extended editions of all three, which God. I actually think help because the stuff that is in the extended edition is more stuff with the dwarves who are supposed to be your main characters. Right. So at least you get a better sense of them. You
Yeah.
know, it's putting in stuff that should have been kept in, and instead of like the politics of Lake Town. You didn't even watch the second two. Anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. But yeah, I mean, it's I think this is why I said before I don't have as much to say about Revolutions, because I think the issues with it are pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and there's also not as many like weird things to talk about. I mean, Reloaded has like, you could talk about the shadowy underground of all the programs. You can talk about sort of the mythic resonance and its subversion of the messiah tropes and what that means about humanity, that we have to have these stories that are keeping us under control and all that kind of stuff. But Revolutions is far more straightforward as a movie.
Yeah. Reloaded sets up a lot of stuff that Revolutions just doesn't pay off, and I think that's disappointing.
Yeah.
And we had to wait for Tron Legacy for someone to capitalize on all those ideas.
Yes.
Rogue programs hanging out in nightclubs.
Yeah, pretty much.
There are some, yeah, there's your interesting double features, Tron and The Matrix.
Yeah. Well, there's clearly, not that Matrix borrows from Tron per se, but there's a lot you could point to, particularly in Reloaded with all the programs. I don't know if you've ever listened to the Blank Check podcast with Griffin and David. They did a big thing on the Matrix movies, and David Sims, who's a film critic for The Atlantic, who's the co-host of that show, his big thing is that the programs in Reloaded all correspond to different programs in like a computer. So Seraph, when he fights Neo, is like a login password screen.
Sure, yeah.
And the Keymaker is a root toolkit type of thing, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and they touch on this in Reloaded and Revolutions. Obviously people were always theorizing about the sort of religious parallels. Like, is Seraph a fallen angel? Is Neo a Christ metaphor? I think if they, even more touched on the parallels between technology and spirituality, that would have been really interesting. Because Tron does that. Like, the users are gods, essentially. And in Tron does have, like, the programs are like, I'm not a fighter, I'm an accounting program.
Right. Yeah.
It's...
Well, and you kind of start getting that in Revolutions, with Ramachandra and that whole discussion. But then it, like, as we're saying, like a lot of threads that Reloaded sort of spins, it's just dropped. It's sort of ignored just to sort of tie up the story.
Yeah, it's basically, they're really interesting ideas, but plot-wise, they're mostly just there for Neo to realize that some aspects of the machine world aren't like horrible mechanical spiders that want to probe him.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's, you see, and this is, now I'm going into sort of Blade Runner-esque things of if all you ever know of the machines is like what you see in the Animatrix one, The Origin of the Machine Wars, the Second Renaissance.
Second Renaissance, yeah.
Yeah, if all you know of them is that, you would think they are the most horrifying monsters that have ever been created. But then you go further and you realize that they are a society, and not all of them, see humans as necessarily evil. And, but that's more than you can do in one feature film. That's, then you're in Battlestar Galactica territory, where you take whole seasons to unpack the Cylons. And we haven't even brought up Battlestar Galactica, but I feel like that's another one that came out of the Matrix.
Absolutely. I think that owes a lot to it, to the trilogy, for sure. Talking about part threes, especially for your concluding movie, you can't really do too much. You do kind of have to be on the rails to end the damn thing. I mean, and we're going to see this with particularly the Star Wars movies have this problem in certain aspects, where it's like they can't, you kind of have to like get to the end at least.
I mean, I think in a weird way in Star Wars, the prequel trilogy has the strongest third movie. I mean, I don't think most people agree that Revenge of the Sith is the strongest one, but they have the benefit there of that everyone knows what the ending is.
Right.
George Lucas was building back from the ending. So
Right.
all the threads inevitably end with, Anakin becomes Darth Vader.
Right.
And we set up 2 kids. That's it.
Yeah.
I think, look, and with the sequel trilogy, a similar problem to, I'm guessing, what happened with Reloaded and Revolutions is you got to sit down with 3 outlines, or in this case 2 outlines, and just make sure that all your plot points that are set up in one chapter are continued and then resolved in the following chapters.
So yeah, I guess as a conclusion to the Matrix saga, or at least this iteration, this version of it, what do you think? I mean, obviously there are problems coming off of the second installment, but as the button on the Matrix trilogy,
I mean, I'm never gonna sit down and just watch The Matrix Revolutions. But I will say, as a whole, as a trilogy, if I watch The Matrix and decide to watch The Matrix Reloaded, I'm probably going to watch The Matrix Revolutions after it. So it's either you do the one movie or you go for all 3, in my opinion. It is still essential. It still has a great ending. It still wraps up Neo as a character really well. And it's a well-made movie. I think it lacks some of the stylish, the action is better in Reloaded, but Revolutions is still like, it's not like they gave up on a technical side.
No,
they're still going all out. Yeah, I mean, it's just a movie where the its failings, it's an I'm not mad, I'm disappointed situation.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a movie that makes me angry the way it does with some people. The way Alien 3 does with some people, but I actually defend it. It's very divisive, but so is Reloaded, and The Matrix is a franchise where its fans and its detractors have crazy strong opinions about it. like dissertation length opinions about it.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm just not as passionate about the franchise as other people are. But yeah, I'm very forgiving of this movie. That's I think where I'm landing.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I watch all 3 pretty much once a year, or every other year, depending on time. I mean, the Matrix, the first movie, it's undeniable, its influence,
yeah.
and as you sort of said at the beginning of this thing, or yesterday, whenever it was, it's like a rocket on rails. Like the story, underneath all sort of the philosophical and stuff, the story is very simple, and it's very easy to follow, even though it seems very complicated. But that sucker moves. Like it just goes. And it's so propulsive.
It's baked into pop culture now.
Yeah.
And like, even if you haven't seen it, you know it. The same way Casablanca or Psycho or Star Wars. It's and if you haven't seen it, like, what the fuck? Go see them. Go watch The Matrix.
How did you get this far into this?
Yeah. You're gonna go and watch it with someone that's seen it before, and they get to watch you fill in all these like Family Guy references you never got growing up. It's this is as valid a trilogy as you can find, amongst the classic trilogies. And I think, like Lord of the Rings for some, or Star Wars for others, it's totally valid. I'm not giving you a funny look when you say you watch it once a year. I think it is a singular vision, and it just doesn't quite stick the landing. Not so much in how it resolves, but just in how the third movie is as its own chapter.
As a movie, yeah, it relies too much on characters who you haven't spent any time with, or you find actively annoying, as some people found characters like the kid and some of the Zion folks, but that's what you're stuck with. You're kind of stuck with them, and the problem is that a lot of people didn't like the Zion stuff from Reloaded, and if you didn't like the Zion stuff from Reloaded, you ain't gonna like a lot of Revolutions.
I mean, on a certain level, though, don't we all like fit, sweaty people in tank tops? No matter what they're doing. I don't know. the dance sequence in Reloaded felt a lot shorter this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things when you're sitting down for that movie for the first time, and that dance sequence happens, and if you're not really on the movie's wavelength at that point, because there's been like a lot of like weird discussions and stuff, and if that point you get to it, I can just see, I mean, I was there, I remember, like, audiences just going, okay, fuck this. I don't want any more.
I mean, it is a little bit like still going. The equivalent in Revolutions is Trinity's death scene.
Right.
She's like, I can't go any further, but I can go. I've prepared a monologue.
It's an operatic death scene, where someone's dying of tuberculosis, but they've got this big aria they've got to sing. So.
I have written in my notes, Elise came in and watched maybe the last 25 minutes with me. So she basically saw Trinity die and Neo go to the machine world and get jacked in. And she said, this reminds me of the new Space Jam. And I was like, holy shit, it is kind of like the new Space Jam.
I haven't watched the new Space Jam yet, so...
it's he gets pulled into the Serververse by Al G Rhythm, and Granny does Matrix moves.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
Remember the Matrix, kids?
Oh, God.
Yeah. I think that's it. I think we've arrived.
Yeah. I think we've made it. I think we've
God knows if any of this will cut together, but
it'll be entertaining anyways.
Yeah,
for us.
That's for sure. So, coming up, I think next time around, we're going to watch Scream 3.
I think that's right.
There's a new Scream out, and if we've both seen it by then, spoilers for Scream 5. But yes, our next movie is Scream 3. Scream Goes to Hollywood.
Yeah.
And then we're going to do Day of the Dead. So we got a little horror-thon going for us. And then it'll be Will's turn to pick.
And I'm going to pick something that will make you mad. So we'll get to it when we get to the Day of the Dead episode.
All right. Well, folks, thank you so much for listening and watching and talking with us. We are on Twitter at Podcast Part 3. That's the number 3. And you can find us on Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And I think we'll be up on Stitcher. And check us out. Subscribe, follow, listen. And
review.
Be kind. And if you can't be kind, be honest. But yeah, this has been a lot of fun. We're having a great time. We look forward to this every week. And until next time, until Scream 3. I am Sam Charrington.
And I'm Will Morey. And always remember, cookies need love like everything does.
Millions of people just living their lives. I love Jonathan Groff in the new one.
He was great.
I wanted Hugo Weaving, but I really liked Jonathan Groff.
Oh, he was great. He was fun. He did a Hugo Weaving impression, kind of.
Just enough.
Just enough. It was the right amount. It was great.
Yeah. All right. That's great. All right. On that note, goodbye.